This is the brand new Garmin Forerunner 570, and it launched alongside the new Forerunner 970 earlier today. And in this video, we're going to talk about all the new features and specs and what they're all about. These new Forerunner models are sort of the evolution of the older Forerunner 965 and 265. Oddly, despite the name 265, the new 570 sort of carries the torch for that line as well. And on top of the new Forerunner 570 and 970, Garmin also launched a new heart rate monitor dubbed the HRM 600 today, which does unlock a couple of extra features on the higher end Forerunner 970. Now, before we get into all the new features and specs, let's talk about the price for a minute, because these watches are very expensive. The new Forerunner 570 comes in at $549 here in the USA, and it does come in a bunch of new colors, including some new translucent band options, which is kind of interesting, while the higher end Forerunner 970 comes in at a whopping $749 here in the USA. And that price is creeping closer and closer towards like the Fenix line, which is in that $1,000 price category. But as you'll see throughout this video, the new Forerunner 970 does share a lot in common with the Garmin Fenix 8 as well. It's sort of like a Fenix 8 Lite. At this point, I just want to go through a quick breakdown on what sets these watches apart between the 570 and 970. Let's start with the 570, which is the lower option. So as I mentioned before, the new Garmin Forerunner 570 is basically the evolution of the Forerunner 265 from a couple of years ago, despite the name difference. The Garmin Forerunner 570 does come in two different sizes. There's the smaller 42mm option, and then there's the larger 47mm option. And the features are exactly the same between both models. The only difference will boil down to the size of the display and the battery life, of course. And we got to talk about battery life because that's an interesting topic. Now, unlike the previous Forerunner 265, the new Forerunner 570 does feel a lot more premium. There's now an aluminum bezel around the display, and the buttons are metal as well. And just like on the Forerunner 265, the new 570 does not feature offline maps, but it does have navigation in the form of breadcrumb navigation. The Garmin Forerunner 570 also does have 8 GB of internal storage for offline music playback or downloading apps from the Connect IQ store, and it does have all the features you've come to expect from a high-end Forerunner model. Body battery, stress tracking, HRV, all of that stuff is here as well, including Garmin Pay. Now that we've covered the Forerunner 570, let's talk about the new 970, because that's the one I'm the most excited about. So from a bird's eye level, the Forerunner 570 and 970 nearly look identical, but there are a lot of differences under the hood. For example, on the Forerunner 970, you do get a titanium bezel and buttons, and it just feels a little bit more premium in the hand. And on top of that, one of the biggest upgrades, in my opinion at least, is that the Forerunner 970 now gets a sapphire lens on top of that AMOLED display. And if you don't know what sapphire lenses are, it makes the display incredibly scratch resistant, which is really good to see. And this is something I've wanted on a Forerunner for a very long time. The new Garmin Forerunner 970 only comes in one size, that is that larger 47mm form factor. And this time around, the Forerunner 970 also gets the built-in flashlight that we saw on the Instinct 3, the Enduro, and the Fenix models. You've got that on the 970 as well. Again, a huge upgrade. I know it sounds like a gimmick, but it's something I use just about every day on my Fenix 8 here. And on top of that, it also comes with that sensor guard that we saw on the Garmin Fenix 8, which is sort of a little bit of metal on the side of the watch that protects the barometer, but also adds a little bit of accent color to the overall look. And of course, just like on the Forerunner 965, the 970 also gets a 1.4-inch AMOLED display. However, there's been some tweaks to it, which we will talk about in a minute. And as usual, the Forerunner 970, unlike the 570 here, gets offline mapping, full offline navigation, so you can see streets and roads and waterways and trails and all the things with labels and points of interest and all of that stuff. And on top of that, you do have additional storage. There's 32 GB of space on the 970 for your maps, so you can download additional maps and your music and apps and all that stuff. Now, in terms of software features, there are a couple of new things that come to the 970 that the 570 does not get, and that comes down to training tools, some additional new features. So on the Forerunner 970, it gets 2 new features that are exclusive to this watch. No other watch has it yet. However, I do suspect that we'll see this trickle down to something like the Fenix 8 in the very near future. The first new feature is called running economy. So this one's pretty interesting because it does require the addition of that new HRM 600 sensor I talked about earlier. With that sensor paired to the watch, you'll get this new running economy metric. The running economy metric will try to determine just how efficient you are in terms of your mechanics while running. And to do that, it utilizes additional sensors inside of that chest strap to make it all work. I haven't been able to test this out, but I am interested to see what it actually does and what kind of value you can gain from it. And on top of that, there's also a new metric called running tolerance. And this one's pretty interesting. It does not require the addition of that HRM 600 band. And this one tries to determine how your body is tolerating your latest running activity to try to let you know how much maximum volume you can take in on a given week before you run into any sorts of problems in terms of like injury or even overtraining. Okay, now that we've talked about what sets these watches apart between the 570 and 970, let's talk about some of the features that they have in common because there are quite a few. First of all, Garmin has stated that these new watches, the 570 and the 970, now feature their brightest display ever. The Garmin people I spoke with said that it's roughly 2 times brighter than the previous models. And in my opinion, it's a very bright display. However, in classic Garmin fashion, they have not put a spec behind that brightness. Typically, even with like Apple, you'll see that they're talking about 2,000, 3,000 nits, where Garmin doesn't put a spec behind that. But if I had to guess, just looking at the display, I would say it's probably in that 1,500 to 2,000 nit range. All that to say, this is a very, very bright display, and I don't think you'll have an issue viewing this in direct sunlight or just about any lighting condition. It's a really nice AMOLED display. And again, the same display is used between the 570 and 970. It'll just be a little bit smaller if you opt for the 42 millimeter 570. Boy, there's a lot of numbers in this video. And another new big feature coming to both the 570 and 970 is the fact that they do have built-in speakers and microphones this time around. We do have the same voice features that the Fenix 8 has. So it does have offline voice commands. If you want to launch an app, start the flashlight, or even check the weather, you can simply talk to the watch to make that all happen. And you can even do things like set timers. The new 570 and 970 also come equipped with Garmin's latest Gen 5 heart rate sensor. And this is really good to see because if you remember, when the Instinct 3 came out back in January, that watch shipped with the older heart rate sensor. This time around, we get the new heart rate sensor, which I really do appreciate. Now that new Gen 5 heart rate sensor is a little bit more accurate than the older Gen 4 heart rate sensor, and it does unlock other features like skin temperature detection and ECG. However, this is another weird one. Even though the new 570 here has the new Gen 5 heart rate sensor, it does get skin temperature, but it does not get ECG. That is exclusive to the 970, the higher end option. And other than the heart rate sensor, these watches are also multi-band enabled, so they should get pretty good accuracy. I'll need to do more testing on that, but stay tuned for review in the near future. Another new feature coming to these watches is called Evening Report, and I suspect this is going to trickle down to a bunch of other watches in the very near future as well. What this is another play on the morning report function that these Garmin watches have had for a while now. Morning report basically gives you a breakdown of your day when you wake up in the morning, telling you how you slept and what kind of weather's coming for the day ahead and what kind of training you're going to be doing, where evening report sort of does the same thing, just in the evening. So it'll tell you what training activities you have coming up the next morning, or even the weather for the upcoming day, which is kind of cool and something I'll probably utilize. Another new feature coming to these watches is called Projected Race Predictor. And as the name implies, it will try to give you a prediction of your estimated race time for a given distance, whether that be 5K or a marathon, for some period in the future. So if you've got an upcoming race and you've been training for it, the watch will identify your training and use some algorithms to come up with sort of your potential time for that given race. And for runners, there's also another new feature that's sort of buried under the hood, but I found super interesting, and it's called Auto Lap by Timing Gate. Not a very sexy name, but a really cool idea in theory. So what this will try to do is it will try to correct your GPS distance based on your race. So if you're running the New York Marathon or the Boston Marathon or something, some big event where we actually know the distance, and maybe you cross the finish line and your watch says 25 miles instead of 26.2, you can actually use this feature to correct your distance based on that event. Now for this all to work, you will need to be running a pretty big event. I think Garmin said they're gonna cover 25 marathons to start, but it will expand as time goes on. And on top of that, there's also a new feature called Suggested Finish Line. And again, this one's really cool and will save a lot of headaches in the near future, where the watch will actually identify when you cross the finish line. And if you forget to stop your watch, it'll buzz and let you know, hey, the finish line was back there. Do you want to stop your watch? Now you're still in full control of hitting the stop button, but it will suggest that you hit the stop button. And again, kind of a neat feature. Okay, now that we've talked about all the new features and specs, the flashlights, the bright displays, the speakers, the microphones, you might be wondering about the battery life. And that's where things are kind of odd, because the new Forerunner 970 and 570 actually get less battery life than their previous counterparts. So on the new Forerunner 570 that I have here, if you opt for the larger model, you're gonna get up to 11 days of battery life with default settings, or if you're in a GPS activity using GPS only mode, you'll get up to 18 hours of use. Now, if you do opt for the higher accuracy all systems mode, you will get 14 hours of battery life. Jumping up to the higher end Forerunner 970, again, reduced battery life compared to the 965. You'll get up to 15 days of battery life with default settings, up to 26 hours in a GPS activity, or up to 21 hours in all systems mode. Now, when it comes to battery life, I do understand why they had to reduce it. They added more components in the form of the speaker and microphone. It's got a built-in flashlight. In the case of the 970, you've got a brighter display. All that stuff does add up, but in my opinion, it's sort of a bit of a bummer as an ultra marathon runner and not someone who's in the front of the pack. When it comes to GPS battery life of 26 hours on the 970, that's going to be cutting it kind of close unless you're really fast. Okay, that's sort of it for my rundown on the new Garmin Forerunner 570 and 970 and all of the new features and specs that I've learned so far. Now, of course, as always, this is just an initial hands-on first impressions kind of video, and I will be taking these home and doing proper testing on them in the very near future. You can expect a full, in-depth, long-term review. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet, make sure to go down, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that upcoming video. And also make sure to check out all the links in the description down below for all of my other social media accounts like my Instagram, my Strava, and all that other stuff. And at this point, I want to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think of the new Garmin Forerunner 570 and 970? Do you think they're worth upgrading to? If you have a 965, is this something you'd consider even though there's less battery life? Is the trade-off worth it when it comes to the display and the speaker and microphone and the flashlight? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. All right, friends, that's all I've got for you in this one. Hopefully you found it helpful or interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.